opportunity. My name is Hisai Miyauchi, and I'm an associate professor at University of Tsukuba Institute of Human Sciences. And my specialty is in special education, and I also focus on individuals with visual impairment and inclusive education.
Hello everyone, my name is Deneen Fast. I am an associate professor at The Ohio State University, and like my colleague, my specialization is in working with students who are blind and visually impaired. My research interests are in accessibility and inclusion, not only for students with visual impairments, but across inclusive smart societies, as part of our grant is looking at for our trip here this time. Today we are going to be looking at a short presentation that discusses exploring accessibility, perspectives on inclusive design across Japan. I was fortunate to be able to come to Japan over a week ago now, before we actually started doing our work with the ISS project. And it was so lovely because as part of that time, I was able to explore Tokyo, explore Tsukuba, the transportation systems, and many accessibility features throughout the city and throughout the country that we're going to talk about today in our discussion. So without further ado, let's make sure if I can make this work. The beginning of our discussion today is just going to give and provide a short overview, as it's unique to work with students who are blind and visually impaired, and oftentimes, even though we have cross-country connections in working with students who are blind and visually impaired, this is what we call a low-incidence disability. So a lot of times professors and professionals are not always aware of the needs of students and consumers who are blind and visually impaired. So before we begin our conversation, what I would like to do is just do a short presentation on defining accessibility, as well as a brief history of inclusive practices within the United States and laws that support accessibility. And then from there, we'll segue to a conversation between Hisai and myself about talking about the importance of accessibility design within all environments. So for the purpose of today's discussion, what is accessibility? From my lens as a professor, as an advocate, as a teacher of students who are blind and visually impaired, I'm going to give you the definition of accessibility as it is defined as the ability to participate in, interact, connect with, use, and belong to the world around us. Accessibility does not have one specific definition. Typically, it's not always considered by many on a regular basis, because so much of our access to society comes naturally through vision and our other senses. However, for individuals with disabilities, and specifically today those with visual impairments, access to education, employment, and the community can be challenging. So in designing inclusive smart societies, or our ISS coursework and grant work that we're doing together, accessibility must be considered. The importance of considering accessibility is that it provides equitable access for all individuals. So in looking at accessibility, not only do we look at environment, we also look at legal and ethical responsibility for making sure that all individuals can participate and be included. We talk a bit about differentiation, how accessibility might look different to different people, how it fosters independence for individuals who are blind and visually impaired, how it reduces barriers, not only to learning, but into environmental access as well, and how it promotes equity across different populations of individuals. There's a lot of research that's being done on accessibility. In the United States, one of the big things that we talk about is the fact that accessibility begins with the law, and the effects of those laws can be seen in various areas across different environments. Things such as ramps that take you to federal buildings or public entities, access to medical records, being able to have someone who can interpret different languages or provide access in alternative forms, and typical routines within everyday life. While there are established laws within the United States to protect these rights with individuals with disabilities, Studies tend to be limited. They're improving and they're becoming more prevalent. However, studies to support individuals diagnosed with low incidence disabilities, and in today's case, those who are blind and visually impaired, as well as awareness practices that meet those needs, is an area that receives little attention, so it's an area where we need continued research. This slide just shows that the importance of accessibility within inclusion, because if areas are accessible, inclusion comes naturally. So as it says here on the slide, accessibility leads to inclusion. It's important to establish inclusive settings as they provide a sense of belonging and equal opportunities to learn for all individuals. Also, individualized needs are met with that accessibility and inclusion. And in order to reach those goals, collaboration is essential. So why inclusion? A closer examination of policies in the United States is warranted when we talk about the importance of why inclusion is important within smart city design. So in the United States, two of the landmark laws that we talk about include the first one as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And this is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in programs and activities that are funded by federal agencies. This started with advocacy movements in the 1970s when one of the most prevalent advocacy rights person was Judy Heumann. She was an advocate who used a wheelchair for transportation, and she actually started one of the biggest movements in 1973 here, as described in this picture. Judy was not able to access the federal building or the Capitol building in the United States because of the stairs that were leading up. And that particular protest and that particular advocacy event, there were individuals who were removing themselves from their wheelchairs and crawling up the steps of the Capitol building to express why accessibility was so very important for them. And as a direct result of that, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was started, and this basically shows that reasonable accommodations that allow for participation in federally supported programs or job performances are now mandatory in the United States for all individuals. The other big piece of law or legal services that we talk about in the United States is what we call the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this really talks about the importance of allowing equal rights to employment, public transportation, state and local government services, businesses that are open to the public, as well as telecommunications. So under the ADA, we make sure that there is not only a universal design in planning, but also what we call an equitable design in planning. The difference between these two forms of planning in smart city design is that oftentimes equitable design is one that involves voice of consumers who are needing that equal access. So having their voice and recognizing that a ramp is not the same as a step. So we'll talk a little bit more about that with regard to design in our conversation after this short presentation.